Welcome to On the Clock with Caroline Clark. I'm Caroline Clark, and today we are joined by an exceptionally successful guest. Shellye Archambeau is a pioneer in Silicon Valley. She is the former CEO of MetricStream and a pioneering executive in tech, which for women is no small feat. She has added to her stellar resume just recently, first-time author. She has written this book, Unapologetically Ambitious, and the subtitle is Take Risks, Break Barriers, and Create Success on Your Own Terms. This book is just out. It is absolutely available, so order it wherever you get books. We are thrilled to have Shellye here today. Shellye, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. And thanks so much for having me, Caroline. I've really been looking for this.
Always. So first-time author in a pandemic. It's not what you had planned when you actually sat there and pecked this book out on your computer. That, I know, is its own challenge. How have you been navigating through this process of being a first-time author in this weird environment?
Oh my goodness, Caroline. It's really been surreal. You know, when everything was getting started, we had these grand plans for a book tour. People were going to have book signing parties, right? We had all these things scheduled, and then March happened, and boom, right? Everything got canceled. And it's like, ooh, okay. So how do you let people know that something's happening when you can't do all the normal things that people told me are good things to do? Right. So I have literally created, as you can see, this welcome to my virtual book tour studio. So I'm trying to speak at conferences, and thanks again for having me at Black Enterprise Most Powerful Women conference in tech, and then speaking to companies and trying to do some events, and I mean, whatever I can do. I'm just trying to share the word to say, hey, there's a book coming and I think it'll be helpful. So anyway, that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, well, I think that you've adapted really well. It is a difficult time to be doing anything, but there are advantages to this, right? Because you can be far and wide and not really have to leave the comfort of your own studio at home. But I am curious because you have had a stellar career. In addition to obviously leading MetricStream, you are on a number of Fortune 500 boards, including Verizon and Nordstrom. So, writing a book is certainly not something that you had to do. Why did you decide to write a book, and why this book right now?
Yes, you're right. Frankly, I'm very goal-oriented, as you know. And becoming an author and write was actually never one of my goals. But what was happening is as I was moving through my career, I've always tried to be accessible. I've always tried to be responsive and be approachable by folks because so many people helped me along the way, and I always wanted to be helpful. But as I took on more and more responsibility, I couldn't meet with everyone that wanted to meet and pick my brain, hear my story, right? All these things, understand what they can do. So I said, when I get to phase 2, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to write it down because I want to share with others the strategies and the approaches, tactics, and even some hacks that work to actually improve your odds to get what you want. Because frankly, the odds weren't in my favor to become a CEO in technology, right? I mean, I don't look like the CEOs, especially when I started out back in the 80s, right now. So I've learned a lot along the way, and I want more people to be able to achieve their aspirations, professionally and personally, because there are a lot of ambitious people out there, and frankly, the ambition isn't always encouraged.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write this book because I wanted to say everyone deserves the right to be ambitious, and you shouldn't have to apologize for it. And the book provides, here are some practical, actionable steps and strategies that you can take to help you achieve your ambition.
You mentioned that you started out in the 80s, and we are in such a different world now, right? But certain things just haven't changed. What are the things that you find just don't change, particularly for women and, obviously for Black women, that you thought would have been different by now, that just really aren't?
Yeah. So the things that I find that are still a challenge is people still make assumptions about women. right? Assume that they aren't ambitious, or assume that they're not flexible to move if they're married and have children, or assume that they don't want more responsibility because they already have so much going on. I mean, there's just so many assumptions that don't even give women the chance to actually compete for roles, because the assumptions are just made. It was interesting. I was looking at a study, and I'm not going to remember all the details, but they asked basically, and this was in tech, they asked women, what were the 5 top reasons why women aren't able, right, to rise to senior levels in tech? And they gave reasons such as role models, not getting the right support, not being able to be given the opportunity, right, et cetera. They asked men the same question, and men said because women aren't ambitious, because women don't have the skills, because women, I mean, it was like, what? I mean, the lists, there's only one item that were on both lists, and that was the lack of role models, which was number 5 for the guy. So it just shows you the whole like expectation is just warped between the two, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things too that is always pointed out when it comes to women, and particularly Black women, because we so often don't feel a sense of belonging in these larger organizations, or for that matter, even smaller ones, is that we don't want it, right? That we may be ambitious, we may want to break through barriers, we may want to get to a certain point, but we don't necessarily want to be CEO, right? This is something that I think is statistically pointed out to us again and again. And I think one of the things that has always set you apart, and it's certainly illuminated when you read this book, is that you, from a very young age, were very clear about the fact that that was your goal. Your goal was not just to be in tech. Your goal was not just to do better at IBM than any Black woman had done before. Your goal was to be CEO of a major company. And at the time, you were looking at IBM. I know your father was a lifer there. You started working there at a very young age and worked there through college and then went there full time. What was it? You know, that is very unique for any woman, for any person really, but certainly for any Black woman. What do you think was it about you, about your background, that made you hone in on a goal that honestly was so far-fetched, kind of, you know? I mean, to be real about it.
Right, exactly.
Your parents could have been like, Shellye, seriously, get a grip and come up with something that's more attainable, right? What do you think was it that made you decide, no, I want to do that?
Yeah. You know, it was honestly a couple things. So one was, I grew up in a really competitive family. You know, my parents were crazy. They had 4 kids in less than 5 years. So boom, 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 boom. So we grew up close, but very competitive. And then, you know, I always felt that the world was like against me in some ways. You know, the odds just weren't in my favor, and people didn't think and didn't expect me to amount to much. And so part of me in that whole competitive nature was, I wanted to show them wrong. And then, you know, the whole idea of CEO, that I can thank to this day my guidance counselor, and her name was Mrs. Stickney. I still remember. But my guidance counselor, who told me that running a business is just like running a club. And I loved running clubs. So I said, okay, now I've got it. I've got a goal. Now, did I really know what that meant? No. Did I really understand it? I was 16. Did I understand just how audacious that was? Not really. I mean, I knew it was a goal and it was high, but I didn't realize just how ridiculous that was.
Right.
And so ignorance is bliss when you're young. And but then once I picked it, I'm competitive, so I picked it and I told people. And so, okay, now I've told people, so now I got to go do it. That's the part of how I've always done it. If there's something that I want to go do, I just start telling people that I'm going to do it. And that combination of self-pride, right, and the peer pressure all helps me make sure that I'm going to get it done, because I refuse to come back and say, oh no, it didn't happen.
Well, you picked it and you started studying it.
Yes.
You really started drilling down and looking at CEOs to see what were the patterns, what were the trends, what were they doing that were the benchmarks for getting them to those places. Clearly, they did not look like you. clearly you were studying a bunch of old white men, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I know one of the things you identified early was that they took global assignments. You were very fluid with your family, moving time and again for your job, with that being the priority. And then you moved to Japan, which was a heavy lift for your family, particularly for your children at the time. Mm-hmm. And I thought that story was really, really illuminating in the book, because you were the first Black woman to go on an international assignment for IBM at all.
That's
which
right.
Pretty impressive, right? Did you feel the weight of that at the time?
You know, I always felt the weight of that, because I knew, because there were so few of us doing anything, that, and I'm talking anything, I mean at executive levels, right, within tech, that that if you do something wrong, if you stumble, if you fail, you feel like you're taking down the entire community with you, right, because you're the singular experience. And so suddenly the singular experience with whoever you're interacting with is not good. And so therefore you're afraid they're going to paint everybody with that same brush. Yeah. So did I feel that? Yes, I felt that all the way through my career. Now, then the good thing is, at least at now higher levels, we still have that challenge to some extent, but at least at the lower and mid levels within tech, there are more of us, right? We weren't even there then. That at least that has taken off some of that pressure, because now there's more experience. But it's a weight that everyone who is one of the only or one of the few in any industry, any career, any area, we absolutely carry that weight.
Yeah. You talk in the book about going into your first presentation in Japan, in a room full of, Japanese employees of IBM, and feeling intimidated and feeling nervous and feeling, that self-doubt. And one of the things that you talk about, I think there's a whole chapter in the book, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome now, particularly, in upper tiers in business. We don't talk a lot about how to, intentionally, just dismantle it, right? How to break it apart and push it out of your way so that it doesn't dog you time and time again. How did you go about doing that?
Yes, and you're right. And that's one of the reasons why I talked about it in the book, because it's not talked about enough. Studies show that most people feel imposter syndrome. Right. Women feel it more than men, but women of color experience it the most.
Right.
And I still do. And I tell people it's not something that you do at one point and then it's gone. It's like, no, it's always still right there on the surface, right? But one of the things is just realizing that it's really not you. Yes, you're feeling it, but it's not you. So many people feel it that it really is, unfortunately, the fact that we live in such a judgy world that creates this nagging self-doubt, right? Constantly. So one, it's not you. So try to realize, all right, it's not you, kind of set it aside. Number two is when people give you opportunities, when they offer you jobs, when they invite you into the room, they do so because they believe that you have the skills, capability, experience, know-how. Believe them, right? And if that doesn't work, then fake it. Fake it until you make it. Really, I tell people, as most recently as Verizon, right? When I joined the Verizon board, here I am. Okay, I'm walking in. There's the CEO of, Walgreens. It's the CEO of Aetna. We've got the CEO of, Darden Foods. We've got, all these people, right? And I'm thinking, I'm walking in, I'm going, okay, all right. Am I really ready? Do they know? All these self-doubt happen. But it was the same thing. It's like, okay, shoulders back, head up. I am playing the role of a corporate board director, and I'm going to walk into that room and act like I know what I'm doing, because eventually I will.
Right.
And that's the piece you have to convince yourself. Eventually you will. You always have. Eventually you always have. Yeah. So, fake it until you make it, and then it gets comfortable, and then you can relax and you're good. But just know it's all in your head, and it is not personal. It's not real. Like I used to tell the kids on TV, when stuff happened that doesn't happen, no, you don't meet somebody, kiss, and then fall in bed. It's like, no, that's not how that happens. This is just TV. I said, it's the same thing, right? Yeah. This imposter syndrome, it's not real.
Yeah.
It's just in your head. It's like TV, put it to the side.
But, I think one of the reasons that Black women experience imposter syndrome more is that sometimes it does feel personal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're being doubted. Sometimes the expectations are lower for you than they are for others, which can be an advantage, but can also psych you out.
Correct.
And so going back to your experience in Japan, you took this assignment in good faith. You broke through a barrier to take it. You got there and very early really impressed them, because I remember in that first assignment, you had a deck up and it was all in Japanese, right? Not your language, but right. Their language. And it was the first time anyone had come from the US and done that, right? So the Japanese were like, wait a second, what? She's speaking to us in our own language. So already you had sort of like gotten over a hurdle that you didn't even know was there. And yet you discovered after being there for a while that in spite of your successes, you got snubbed a little bit, yep. Right? Can you just paint that picture and talk about it?
Absolutely. So, here I am, 14 years at IBM, been moving my family all over the place, making all kinds of trade-offs because I'm heading towards the goal. And, there were a few things that happened. One, I just didn't feel they were compensating me for what I was actually worth. And then what happened in Japan is the CEO came, Lou Gerstner came over and actually had individual meetings with some of my peers, but not me. And I had actually really turned around our group, and we were bottom tier performers, and we're pushing towards the top tier performer the whole bit. And so I was really disappointed. But when I got home and I shared with my husband what had happened, Scotty was angry. He was angry. And when we talked about it, I realized, what? I should be angry too. This is more than just disappointment, right? What's going on here? And so I thought, if that's the kind of thing that's happening, then what are the odds really that I'm going to be CEO here? And my goal is to be CEO. It's not to get as high as I can at IBM. That was not the goal. The goal was to be CEO. And so and it was hard. Lots back and forth, thinking, talking. As you said, I was born and raised at IBM, basically. If you cut me, I bled IBM blue. All of my friends were IBM, my network, right, safety, everything. I knew what I was doing.
You met your husband.
Exactly. Scotty at IBM. So all of it. So the whole idea of leaving? Really leaving? That was hard to imagine. And I knew it was going to be so uncomfortable and, oh my goodness, right? The risk, everything else. But my goal and my ambition to achieve the goal, frankly, outweighed all of that. And so, made the tough decision to say, all right, I need to leave.
Yeah.
I need to leave and find my CEO role somewhere else.
How do you decide, though? I thought that story was really pivotal, because I think the fact of the matter was you were prepared to take it, right? You were prepared to suck it up. If your husband, Scotty, hadn't been just completely outraged, I think that your muscles were geared toward sucking it up, right? Because that wasn't the first time you'd been snubbed.
Right.
That wasn't the first time you'd realized that some of your peers were probably earning more than you were. So you sort of had been conditioned to just deal with it and keep going. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that a lot of us really wrestle with. How do you decide in order to succeed, regardless of what your level of ambition is, right? In order to succeed, you're going to have to suck some stuff up. Everybody is. But as a Black person and as a Black woman in particular, there are just things that go along with the territory that are not going to be fair and are not going to be your way, and you're going to have to just deal with it. But how do you decide when it's just too much?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Absolutely. And, it's a fantastic question, because one of the things I also talk about in the book is the importance of having a cheerleader or cheerleaders. And Scotty was my cheerleader. And, it's important to have those people because, yes, when you're feeling down and not capable and insecure and everything else, you need somebody there to build you up.
Yeah.
But you also need that person there to be able to show you the mirror, right? To show you the mirror, Because to your point, yes, I mean, I knew, I was raised, life isn't fair. All right. So yes, there are things that are happening. You suck it up, you keep moving forward the whole bit. And you're right. I do think was I disappointed? Absolutely. But I think without Scotty putting up the mirror and saying, oh, wait a minute, right? That I would have just, all right, still kept focused, kept going until I hit some other point, and I would have lost that time. So part of having a cheerleader is having someone there. And it doesn't matter. I was lucky it was my husband. It doesn't matter who it can be, a sister, a friend. I mean, it doesn't matter. But you need someone who can take that outside view and help you raise up from the trees to see the forest, to be able to help you make those decisions. And I think it's critical. That's why I spent all this time talking about cheerleader. I think everyone needs a cheerleader in their life to make sure they've got that, because we become conditioned. You know, it's just like the temperature. You know, can I survive like 95 degrees outside? You can if you sit there long enough, your body acclimates. But if you come in from 80 degrees, 70 degrees in your house and walk out to 95, oh my God, you're dying. And so you need that person who's going to show you that, oh wait, no. It's really 95. Get the hell out of height.
Right.
So yeah.
We're talking about Scotty, and I do think one of the things that is important to note about your story, and you talk about it very directly in this book, is that, you know, when we think of ambition, and particularly being so bold as to say, especially as a woman, you're unapologetically ambitious, right? We really just think in terms of career. And one of the things, Shellye, that I've always been impressed by with you and your story is that you really have a 360-degree approach to life and to ambition. And it was never, even at that young age when you knew you wanted to be a CEO, you also knew with just as much clarity that you wanted to have a life partner and that you wanted to be a mother. And I think, you know, this is, I know I have a friend who talks about this as the third rail, that we don't discuss this as Black women enough, which is that life balance. And we hate to use these words because there's no balance, yada, 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 but not being so focused on your career ambitions that you forget to be as intentional about what else you want your life to be, whatever that may be. Can you talk a bit about that? Because your story is just as unique on the personal side. And you were absolutely just as intentional on the personal side. Can you talk about that and how you sort of developed that vision so that it was so inclusive of all of the facets of your life that you wanted?
Yes. You know, this is where I really credit my mother, frankly. Now, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but there are very few people as ambitious as my mother is. So I've always believed that ambition is not something that's just career related. Ambition just means that you work towards objectives and goals with intent. That's how I think of ambition manifesting itself. And she absolutely did that. But what she told me, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is I remember a fateful conversation because my mother also was the hardest working person in the family. Never got enough sleep, always doing for everybody else, right? And I was like, you know, if this is what being a mother is, I am not doing it. And I told her that. I was like, I'm not doing this. And she was like, wait a minute, let's have a conversation. And the conversation really was, Shellye, you have to decide what's important to you in life and then go after those things. And then what's not important, don't focus on it. And this whole conversation came because Mom actually baked a pie. She baked everything. We had homemade dessert every night growing up. I mean, it's amazing.
That's like your house, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. But you know, we have 4 kids and you got a husband and her. And so what happens is you cut all the pieces. I don't care if it's pie, cake, you know, whatever it is, cut it all up. And everybody grabs for the biggest piece because that's what you do. And so Mom always got whatever was left over, which was always the smallest piece. And I'm just like, she's the one who baked it. She's the one who did, and she's getting the smaller piece. Like, I am not doing this, right? Until she said, Shellye, I don't care about the pie. I wouldn't care if I didn't have any pie. She said, I have everything that I care about. So decide, what do you care about? And then go get those things. And so I just totally absorbed that view. And so I said, all right, I just have to be intentional and figure out what I want and the rest of the stuff, right? And so that's why I said, all right, well, I want to be CEO, and yes, I want a husband, and yes, I want kids. And all right, so how is all this going to work? And here's what I think I did differently from most people. I asked myself, how is this going to work? And then I did research, and I put a plan in place to say, okay, well, if this is going to work, here's how. I want to get married early. I want to have kids early, because that way I'm early in my stage and we're going to move, and it's easier to move when kids are young. And all these things that I planned. And then what I did that a lot of people also don't do is I just assumed the plan was going to happen according to my timeline.
Right.
So therefore, I made decisions assuming that these things were going to happen. And most people around me thought I was absolutely nuts. I'm talking about saving for my wedding. It's like, wait, wedding? You're not even engaged. You don't even have a committed boyfriend. Yeah, I know, but I want it to happen in this time frame. It's a lot of money, so I got to start saving now, right? Or I buy clothes and I plan. Everything I did, I just assumed it was going to happen. And that way I feel like I increased my luck for things to happen well. So yeah, when I got married, I paid for my wedding. So my parents had told me when we started college or wedding, right? That's it. And it's not even all of it, just how helping. I said, all right, college. So I knew it was on me.
Right.
And when I did get engaged and I got married at 22, I wrote the check for my wedding for 300 people. So, and I got lucky, right? Lucky that I had the money.
Right. And you got lucky in a lot of ways, because you got married on your timeline, straight out of college, to the guy you've been with all through college, an older guy.
Yep.
Maybe not what your parents anticipated, but also a guy who you had those conversations before you even got engaged, that your career was going to be a priority, and he had to be on board with sort of holding it down in all those ways that largely were traditional to women, especially at that time.
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that? Because even today, right, 30 years later or whatever it is, that's not the easiest thing to find. And women don't always know how to have those conversations or even what to ask for. So how did you know to do that at 20 years old? And, and what do you say? And how do you negotiate through those things? Because it's not a one-time negotiation, to be sure.
No, there are many conversations. Absolutely. But it goes back to this plan of what has to be true. What has to be true. And I was like, all right, if I want to be CEO, then I've got to have a life partner who wants that for me too. Yeah. Where that is part of our joint vision for the future. So I can't get married to somebody until I know whether or not that's actually the case. Right? Otherwise, who knows? And then it could be a problem. So all those things backed me up to say, gosh, I've got to have these conversations before I actually commit to somebody, which means as you get serious, before you get engaged, you got to have the conversations, because I can't answer the question unless I know. So all these things backed me up to say, ooh, all right. So I created my list, created a list of what I needed, what I wanted on a piece of graph paper. It's too funny. I actually framed it for him when we got engaged and had it for years. And I should have kept it, but who thinks you're going to need that kind of thing again? But anyway.
You could have put it in the book. You would have needed it.
I know. Exactly. If I realized that I was going to write a book, I would have kept it.
Right.
But that's what caused me to back up to say, ooh, I've got to have these conversations. And so the way I had the conversations was, you'd sit down and talk about the future. What do you want to do in the future? What do you see? And then I'd share, one day I really want to run a company. I want to be a CEO. I want to be in tech. Let's talk about what you want to do and what you've been. I want to have a family. Do you want to have a family? Right. So we just start talking about those things. And then you start talking about, okay, so how would this all work? Right. Because I said, odds are to do that, you have to move around a lot, because who knows where opportunities will be. And I want to do this quickly, not slowly. So are you willing to move? Are you willing to do? So we had all these kind of conversations, and he was all on board with the whole CEO. Yep, I can see that, the whole bit. But I had the one question that was the hardest question to answer, to ask, actually, because I'm like, oh, how do I ask this question? What's it going to say? And the whole bit. And the question was, we're sitting there, and I said to him, we both talked about wanting kids. He said, yeah, definitely want kids. And I said, well, I do too. I said, and frankly, I liked the fact that my mother was a stay-at-home mom. And at the right time, I'd be willing to make the trade-offs for someone to actually be home with the kids, even if that meant, less things and less those, whatever. And he said, my mom worked, but she tried to be home with the jobs that she had a lot. So he says, I can understand that. He said, that makes sense. I could see that. And I said, good, because I wouldn't want the person staying home to be me. Right? And then I shut up. It was like, oh my God. And it was so funny because he's sitting there and he's like,
are we hiring someone? What?
Exactly. He's like, I see it like processing. He's like, oh. And then he's like, oh. Huh. Right? And he's saying, exactly. It's like, oh, it's all hitting what I'm saying. I'm like, oh gosh. And I'm just like, I'm not saying a thing. Not saying anything until he says something.
Right.
And the most loving words, right, he ever could have said. He said, I like to work. I've always worked, but I could do this for you. And then he asked me to marry him, a few weeks later.
Yeah. So, we're talking about all this intention and ambition, but we know there's the life we plan, even with the best of plans and all the graph paper in the world.
Absolutely.
And there's the life we get. And there's always gaps in the middle, and that's where we grow, and that's where we figure it out, but that's where it's really hard, right? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about the life you got. Talk about the toughest things that weren't on plan that have ended up defining where you are now.
Well, let me just share one kind of personal with Scotty and I, and then I'll talk about the professional side. So, all right, so fast forward. We're now at the point where it makes sense for Scotty to be home. And so he's ready, and he's been doing some consulting, right, et cetera. And so he said, all right, I can do this full time. And anyway, I was the one that was really, call it managing, the household help, the nanny and, au pairs, what have you. So when Scotty started staying home, I kind of started managing him just like I was managing them, right? Hey, here's what needs to be done. Here's the da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, boy. That did not go over at all.
Yeah.
Right? At all. We had some really tough periods there where he's like, either you're doing the job or I'm doing the job, but I'm not doing your job. Right? I mean, it's like, and then he and I mean, Scotty likes things clean. I mean, he will clean, which was fantastic. I like things neat, and I can live with a little dust. Right? Yeah. Clutter doesn't matter to him as long as everything's clean underneath. Right. So we're different that way, right? Right. Well, suddenly, he's the one that's home all the time. And so, we're getting piles and I'm kind of like, so we had a lot of things. And you know what? I had to let go. We agreed. Yeah. We had one counter when I first walked in the door of this house at the time when he started staying home. We had one counter that you saw right when you walked in the door. And all I asked was, can we just keep this counter clean? Yeah. The rest of it, I can live with, right? Just one. So the key is learning how to, frankly, let go and live with things that honestly, was the clutter important? No, my kids were happy. They were healthy. They were fed, right? They were this and this. He was good. I was good. I mean, let it go. Yeah. Right? Let it go. And that's hard, but you have to learn it. So anyway, so that was one. And then career-wise, okay, so I've now decided to leave IBM. I've gone to Blockbuster. So it means I'm moving my family from Tokyo, Japan to Dallas, Texas. Okay? Kathleen is now starting high school. Keaton's in junior high. Things at first are going real well, but about 7-8 months into it, it becomes clear that, you know what? This was not the right move. It's not the right company. It's not the right. And then it's Dallas. Dallas is not a tech hub back then. So it's like, ooh, I'm going to have to find something to do to get me towards this CEO thing. And I really want to get to Silicon Valley, but we haven't even been here 8 months. So the impact was Silicon Valley was the right thing to do. So I moved. I basically commuted for 3 years from Dallas, Texas to Silicon Valley. Well, my family stayed in Dallas so that we didn't uproot my daughter. So it wasn't a bump, 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 kind of move. I mean, all of those things. And so was that ideal? No, not for anyone. So things don't always go as planned, but you keep the goal, you adjust the plans, and you move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that one of the pivotal things that also, was not in your plan was dealing with illness. And Scotty was diagnosed with cancer some years ago, and you approached it the way you did everything in your lives as a team, focused on living, and ultimately, after a really valiant and extended battle, he passed away. And I think there are two things I'd like you to talk about just before we go. One is sort of how you continue to push and work and drive your life forward when you are dealing with, something that is disruptive and really difficult and distracting, right? Because so many have to incorporate that into their journey. And then also, just to end, I want you to talk about loss, because we are living in a time, obviously, where so many families are dealing with losses. And again, having to push forward and having to recover and heal. So just first, can you talk about that journey with Scotty and your family and your work? Because you were leading Metric Stream at that time.
Yes, I was. So, yeah, it's one of the hardest things to go through is when you hear the diagnosis, cancer. And then you hear terminal cancer. So we know how this ends. But you don't know exactly how long. When Scotty got diagnosed, the expectations were about 5 years. The good news is he lived for about 9 beyond that point. But once we got our heads around it, what Scotty and I agreed is that we were going to live life first and fight cancer second. We were optimizing for quality of life, not quantity of life. So we have always tried, no matter what we faced or what was happening, to agree on what the objective was. We did that with our kids. What do we want for our kids? We did that with everything. We always talk, all right, what's the objective, so that we can align and we can be together. And so we agreed, live life, quality, not quantity. And so the first thing we did was we took the kids and went to Africa for 3.5 weeks. It's the first thing we did. But what it told us is, okay, if it's live life first, I'm a CEO. I took every single vacation day. I had never done that. Ever, right? Ever done that. And you know what? I was still able to do okay. Now, it didn't mean I cut myself completely off. Full disclosure, right? Was I up in the mornings and was I still doing? The answer is yes, but I did it from some fantastic places. And so we did the travel, right? We did things with, the kids. And what I told the kids was, this was actually a bless. I believe there's always a blessing, no matter what happens, no matter how ugly, how awful. Underneath, there is some blessing. You just have to look harder sometimes. And the blessing for us was going to be that myself and my 2 kids, we were going to live a better life because of Daddy's diagnosis, because we were going to live in the moment, and we were not going to have any regrets because we had this time and we had this knowledge. So that was the goal for us, no regrets. And so we did everything, and we celebrated everything, and we had parties, and we did everything. And, I kept working, and people were kind of like, gosh, well, why are you still working? Right? I mean, why are you still working? Well, if I stopped working, then everything became about cancer.
Yeah. Did you feel judged in that, Shellye? Because it's an interesting point, right? We didn't talk about that. Did you feel judged? And throughout your career, when you did feel judged, how did you handle that? Do you just not care? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, I felt judged absolutely at times, not from people that were close to us,
Right.
but you always have these, groups that extended whatever. So I know I know people were kind of like, what is she doing? Right. But they don't know me and they don't know us. And what I've always done when people were judging, right, or making assumptions or whatever, the internal strength and fortitude was always, you don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of. And so it's fair that you think something that you do because you don't know me. So I'm not going to take it personally. If you knew me, really knew me, and then you were judging me, that would be different. Then that would affect me. But in general, I'm like, you don't know me, so it's okay. So I just smile, right? And that has helped me through a lot. But it's interesting because it was tested. You know, there's a time when Scotty, I didn't think he was going to make it. I mean, he had lost 50 pounds and he couldn't walk. And I'm like, oh my God. And he had doctors all the time and this all the time. And I'm trying to juggle metric system. And I said, Scotty, you know, because the last thing you heard is his immune system's so compromised, he can't eat anything that's not cooked at home. Hello. And so I said to him, I said, babe, I have to step out, right? I got to step out. And he said, and I'll just never forget it because he's laying in bed, he can barely move. And he looks at me, skin and bones. And he's like, if you step out, then all we're doing is living cancer. He goes, and then what the hell am I fighting for? I'm going to get emotional right now. Okay, right? So it's like, okay then. So I've got to figure out how to make this work. And thank God, I have a really amazing village. So I reached out for help everywhere. I was like, sound the alarms. I need help. And honestly, for this was like November, right before Thanksgiving until March, somebody in my family, friends, somebody was staying with us. I will buy the airline tickets. So just sign up. And people would come for 2 days, 3 days, a week, you know, whatever it was. I mean, it was amazing. The Calvary, I had friends cooking, because even though people came, didn't mean they could help feed us. I had friends cooking and dropping off meals, and they knew they had to cook it at home, right? So it was not even, blessed, so blessed.
Yeah.
And we made it, and he made it through, and he lived another, from that point, 4 years. Yeah.
Amazing.
From that point.
And, you know, it's so important to say, right? Because being unapologetically ambitious does not being all things to all people, does not mean being superwoman, and certainly does not mean not being able to ask for help, right? That is a critically important piece of the puzzle for you, is it not?
It is. And it's something I talk about too. I'm always like, if you don't tell the universe what you need, the universe can't help you. Yeah. So tell the universe. So many people are happy to help if they know how to help you or know what you need. But so many of us are stoic, right? We go through things, we don't tell anybody. And yes, does it make you vulnerable? Yes, it makes you vulnerable. But you know what? That's okay. It is.
And it makes you human.
Yes, and we all are.
Yeah.
We all have our things and our issues and our challenges and our tragedies. We all have them. So, you know, let the world help you. But yeah, I mean, anyway, I learned so much in terms of through that period.
Well, in telling the universe what you need, I know you need to get off. And you out there, whether you know you need it or not, you need to order this book, Unapologetically Ambitious by Shellye Archambeau. It's excellent. It tells a story that you need to hear. It's really illuminating. It's empowering. It's inspiring. Shellye, thank you for being on the clock with me today, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Carol. I've really enjoyed it.
Congratulations, author.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.